Hey, welcome to the Culture Focus Practice podcast. I am your host. I almost said lovely host, but that's, TBD. Actually, it's just debatable. It's just straight up debatable. I am your host, Dr. Tara Vossenkemper. And today we are going to be talking about probably one of my favorite things, kind of. We're going to be talking about the role of diffusing conflict, the role of leadership, in diffusing conflict. Conflict is one of my favorite things. That sounds nuts, so just hear me out. It enhances relationships. When it's done well, it enhances relationships. Conflict, first of all, is unavoidable. It's inevitable. It is bound to happen. If you're telling me, no, it doesn't happen at my practice, either you are not aware of it or somebody is shielding you from it, or you are very oblivious. And I mean that with love and a little bit of like poking fun. I mean, it absolutely does happen. It does. It's unavoidable. It has to happen. There's no other way. So when I say conflict, also what I'm talking about, I'm including in this, like, I'm thinking of conflict as an umbrella term. Any moments of tension, any sort of friction between people or within a group where there's a problem and not everybody's on the same page. And so you're sort of debating, you're working through things. We might even loosely, like very, very loosely say that a debate is kind of conflict. It's a little bit of conflict. I would say that's a very mild form of conflict, but regardless, it's a little bit of conflict. So conflict is unavoidable, and it can be a very healthy thing when done well. It has to be done in a healthy way. It has to be done well. It has to be done appropriately. When that does take place, the outcome is that you have a better relationship with the person. You have a better dynamic among the group. You have more insight into yourself. You have more understanding of the people around you. You have clearer boundaries, maybe about your own like internal thresholds with regard to something or about a system at your practice. It can, we will get into this. I mean, it can be a very positive thing, again, when it's done well. So just for context, my specialty in clinical work, I've been a therapist for years, and my specialty is high conflict couples on the brink of divorce, couples, sort of their last hurrah coming in. It's like their last, like, this is it. We've done this before. It's never worked. Like, we're throwing everything in. So I see how transformative healthy conflict can be in my own experience, my own personal life. I know how incredible it can be to be engaged, the after effects of engaging in healthy conflict and working through shit that just bubbling up inside, or you can tell it's happening out here somewhere, out in front of you somewhere with another person. I'm not saying that I love being in conflict. So the experience of being in conflict with another person, super unsettling. I will absolutely not lie to you and say that that's a fun experience. If it is for you, that says a lot about you. But I am also not willing to say that the discomfort should be more important than the outcome of working through the problem. So you might be uncomfortable. You probably will feel either unsettled or uncomfortable or just really like, oh God, I don't want to, you might, if you tend to withdraw, you might really want to like shut down and move in the other direction. You can't do that. You can't do that as leadership at the practice, as leadership at either your group practice or as leadership at a group practice. It's our responsibilities as leaders to help diffuse conflict at, I would say, when applicable, when relevant, when appropriate. You're not going to get involved in every single little thing. So let's go through this then. So we are laying the foundation. Conflict is inevitable. It can be a very healthy experience when you do it well. And I will leave that there. So here are a couple of common mistakes that leaders make when it comes to being involved in conflict or lack thereof, I guess. One is being too passive. If you are taking a totally hands-off approach to conflict I'm going to say at your practice, at the group practice, that can be problematic. Sometimes, there are moments when letting something ride is okay, but if that is the default approach, that's probably not going to work long-term. So being too passive is one thing. Micromanaging is another. So kind of the opposite of being too passive, I would say, is being way too involved, just at every single little tiny step of the way, trying to control the entire narrative, trying to control how people should feel about it, just being overly involved. Also not going to work. The third thing is just avoiding the issue altogether. So if I, in the beginning, I think I said something about if you say we don't have conflict. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. I would also maybe posit, or I would hypothesize that in saying we don't have conflict is sort of a way of avoiding the issue altogether, either feigning ignorance or, putting your head in the sand to avoid it altogether, which is, like we said, not a good thing. That's a very common mistake that leadership can make, that leaders can and do make at practices. There's a few things. So think about this as like a mindset, or the next few points. I've got about 4 things I want to talk about here that are regarding the mindset for engaging or helping diffuse conflict, having a mindset for conflict resolution. One is that it's your responsibility, it's our responsibility as leaders to really set the tone for conflict. So even I would actually, I'm going to use this podcast as an example, this episode, even in the beginning of this episode, saying conflict is 1, inevitable, and 2, when done well, it can be very healthy. I know this for a fact. This is supported by research. This isn't just me spouting off nonsense bullshit, which I also am prone to do, and I like doing sometimes. But this is true. It is just, we know this. This is what research tells us. So it's your responsibility to set the tone. And so by me saying in the beginning, conflict is inevitable and it can be done healthy, it's also uncomfortable in the middle of it. Doesn't mean it shouldn't happen. That's part of setting the tone. I have that approach in life everywhere, but also at my practice. I know things are going to come up. My team knows things are going to come up. I don't care when things come up. They know I don't care when things come up. And if they don't know, they learn pretty quick. New folks might not know, but as they're part of the team and they witness, as they're part of the meetings and they see how somebody might bring up something they're uncomfortable with, or it's something that they're unhappy about, how it's done and how leadership responds, then they understand, they get it. They have a felt sense for what that's like. And then they're also likely to believe and embrace that conflict is okay. It's okay to be unhappy about stuff. It's okay to speak up about stuff. So leadership sets the tone for anything conflict related. Second thing is emotional intelligence is very, very important here. I will not say it's be all end all type of intelligence, but it's really important to have some sort of emotional intelligence whenever you are engaging in conflict. So when I say emotional intelligence, here are specifically the things that I mean. One is self-awareness. This is hard because everybody thinks they have self-awareness, but if it's a bell curve, if self-awareness is a bell curve, we know that some people are going to fall below that curve, like on the lower end of things. So self-awareness is something you need to be aware of your own shit, honestly, when stuff's coming up for you, your own triggers, your own temperament, your own tendencies, your own, again, internal thresholds for things. That's one thing. Another is regulation. So if you are getting worked up about something, which is going to happen, and again, it's inevitable and it's okay, we have to be able to regulate. Regulate might not mean in that exact moment where you are able to physiologically bring yourself back down. So thinking too, conflict is, of course, it's like content. I mean, interpersonal related, but it's also, there's something internal with conflict where we have physiological happenings in our body. We have physiological arousal when certain things come up. It's sort of, I'm not going to say outside of our control, but I will say our body will respond to certain things, whether moments in the conversation, certain topics, if somebody says something in a certain way. I know that if I get a hint of judgment without somebody voicing it, like a hint of not judgment, I don't care if people judge, criticism without seeking to understand, I'm pissed. I'm angry. Like right away I have like a response. I cannot operate from that moment. I know myself enough to say, like, I got to take a minute. Like I can't actually either have this conversation right now or respond to this email, or I can't talk about this topic. That can also be regulation where I say, you know what? I need some time to think about that. Like I need to take a few minutes. So regulation doesn't mean you have to bring yourself physiologically back down in the moment to continue that exact conversation, you might say, I need to take a few minutes. The important thing about regulation, about bringing yourself back down, is that you have to re-engage in the conversation. So if you are saying you need a few minutes, hold true to your word. Just make it 3 minutes, bring yourself back down, and then re-engage in the discussion. So the discussion still has to happen. Whatever the conflict is, you still have to be able to engage in the process of diffusing it, or, head it up, whatever it might be that your role is in that, discussion. So again, 1 is self-awareness. 2 is regulation. This is part of emotional intelligence. So we're talking about mindset for conflict resolution. First and foremost, you set the tone. 2, you need emotional intelligence. Under 2A would be self-awareness. 2B would be regulation. We have to be able to regulate. 2C, the last piece to emotional intelligence, is sometimes you just need to listen. Listening is also another one of those things. And again, my background is clinical. I know how shitty people are listening. You think you're good at it. You're probably not. And I don't mean, I'm not, no shade. Like, I'm not trying to shit on you or something, but listening is really hard to do. If you can't capture back what somebody has said to you with accuracy, you are not fully listening. So when I'm talking about listening, I'm talking about set your own agenda to the side and fully engage and try to get inside that person's head. So if somebody comes to me with something they're mad about, which happens, I have people that do come to me and they are upset with me. They're upset about something that's happened at the practice. They're upset about why I haven't moved on something. They're upset about something I said, whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. Somebody comes to me and they're upset about something and they say, like, it really bothered me that this thing took place, or I really don't understand why, blah, 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 whatever it might be. I have a couple of options. One is I could just respond back, well, I told you why. I told you that we had to do this and this and this. And immediately that tone, that response, it sounds defensive. It is defensive. I'm like doubling down on, well, I already said this, so I'm going to tell you again. Instead, that's just doubling down. That's not good listening. Instead, I might say, okay, so I'm hearing you say that you're confused about why we're not doing blah, blah, blah. Tell me more. Like, what do you understand about this, and what is your confusion? Can you try to just expand, and I'll help to solve this for you. Like, I want to figure this out with you. Much different. I'm literally just inviting that person to share a little bit more. The caveat to this, so this would be, sometimes I think in lists, or like decision trees, or like logic trees, logic flows. If 2, the emotional intelligence, and then the subcategory is knowing when to shut up and just listen. The nested under there would be 2C1, Roman numeral, little Roman numeral 1, would be certain ways of engaging aren't appropriate. So if somebody comes to me and they say, you're a real piece of shit for this, absolutely, I'm not going to say, yeah, tell me more about how I'm a real piece of shit. I'm going to say, hang on a second. I know that you're mad, but we're not having this conversation in that way. Like, I need you to use better language. No coming at me, no character attacks. Don't call me names. None of that's appropriate. Tell me what you're mad about, and then we can try to work from there. So I can cut off some of the shitty language and still stay focused on what is happening. Still try to solve it with them. So 1, you set the tone. 2, emotional intelligence is very, very important. And again, under emotional intelligence, self-awareness, regulation, just listen, practice listening. 3, so now we're past that. We're going to get into still more mindset. There's 4 things here. 3 is that you don't have to win. I think about this all the time. Your goal isn't to win in conflict. There's not really winning. I mean, there's no winning in conflict. It's literally about being understood. That is the way to navigate conflict most effectively. My goal in helping people with conflict and diffusing conflict is to help them feel understood, and I still have to hold the lines and the parameters of the practice. So just because I understand where somebody's coming from, I don't need to win, because my responsibility is not, it doesn't matter if I quote win, end quote, an argument. What matters is that my people feel understood, and the priority of the practice. I'm still have to hold the practice. Again, I have to hold the lines for the practice. So in some ways, it almost is not about me. It's about being sort of a channel for what needs to happen. Like I can hear where somebody's coming from. I can even validate. I can understand. A lot of times I do, where I'm like, yeah, I don't really like this thing either. And I have no better solution for the situation given all of the factors involved. That's just it. And so it's really not about winning. And so sorry, I'm so sorry. One more thing I will say about that is you don't need to win if le- your leadership at a practice, like by default, you're setting the vision and directing, you're charting the course. That ultimately, I always end up thinking to myself, at the very end of the day, the practice is what I want it to be. That is the win. So again, for conflict resolution, if we're talking about mindset, it's not about winning. It really is about being understood, feeling validated. And for each person, in order to do that, we have to both be heard and hear. So we have to listen and be able to, speak clearly. Okay, last piece to mindset, and then we're going to move on to some common scenarios. Last piece to mindset is psychological safety. Nobody's going to speak up if they don't feel safe. So psychological safety, emotional safety, your amygdala is always looking for safety. It's always scanning the environment for threats. Your brain is absolutely hardwired to assess for safety, even without your conscious awareness. You don't have to be aware of this for it to be happening. It is happening, period. So we have to make sure that people feel safe enough to speak up. And if they don't, then the conflict is still there. Remember, conflict is inevitable. Conflict is still going to be there, but it's not going to come up and it's not going to be able to be worked through, massaged out, solved, fixed. None of those things are going to be able to happen. So psychological safety is paramount for conflict to even arise to the surface in such a way that we can seek to solve it. So that's your mindset. You set the tone. You have to have some level of emotional intelligence. You need to be working on that. Again, emotional intelligence being self-awareness, regulation, and knowing when to listen. Goal is not to win the argument, and psychological safety is very important. Here are some common scenarios. We're gonna do a hard shift then. We're gonna talk about common scenarios and how leaders should step in. So one is I like this one. I think it's funny. One is a passive aggressive email chain. I do not do passive aggressive well. That is definitely something that pisses me the fuck off. That's what it does. It just really gets under my skin for a lot of reasons. But one is that passive aggressive feels like, and I would argue is, absolutely a lack of ownership on the person who is communicating in that way. It's basically not saying what actually needs to be said. And I'll say one of the core values that our practice is authenticity and candor. And so passive aggressive, I would contend, is the exact opposite of authenticity and candor. And there's just no place. There's no place in my life. I do not do passive aggressive. So passive aggressive email chain. Here's what happens. You've got two employees, and this is maybe like a full team email chain. This is kind of cringy to even think about, kind of embarrassing. You've got two employees who are just throwing shade via email. You can sort of detect some undercurrent of something. Poor leadership would be ignoring it. You're just like, oh God, please stop. Just stop emailing. Will someone please do this? Everyone's talking about it behind the scenes. Good leadership response. You have to call it out. And again, I would say this is where you could lean on your values at your practice. If you have core values, which you should, if you don't, that's a side note. But if you do have them, lean into your values. What values not being lived out in what's happening? Again, one of our values is authenticity and candor. So my response to this email thread, my inbox is the bane of my existence. So if I get onto this email thread and I see all these passive aggressive emails going back and forth, I'm going to reply to everybody who's been involved up to that point. It's going to be, hey, there's something happening in this email that doesn't feel very good. We're going to stop this thread, but specifically, I want to chat with these, these parties who have been involved, and we're going to figure out what's going on. In doing that, I am letting everybody know, everybody on the email thread, this isn't okay. I am not going to solve this in front of everybody because it's not everybody's business, but we are saying this is not okay. I am going to let the people who were doing it specifically, again, in sending that email, for example, I'm going to let them know, I'm going to follow up. We're going to talk more about this. This isn't done. And then I'm going to get them together. We're going to sit and talk together. And I'm going to say, what the fuck, y'all? Like, what the fuck was that? We need to talk. Tell me what's going on. And I'm going to help figure out what's actually happening. I'm not going to own the conversation, but I'm going to help them talk about it in a way that's actually effective. I'm not going to, by own the conversation, I mean, I'm not going to be too micromanagey, which is a common leadership. That's a common mistake that leaders will make in diffusing conflict. But we need to figure out what's happening, what's going left unsaid that needs to be said. How did we get to a point that we're resorting to shady emails in front of the whole team? What happened that this wasn't addressed earlier? How was this missed? Maybe by leadership or like from the 2 or 3 or 4, whoever is involved, by the parties involved. So in doing that, again, we're sending a message to the whole team that this isn't okay. But the details of how we're going to work this out that's not everybody's business. But everybody then still knows we will address things as we see them. We'll do this together. We'll do it as a group. I get the relevant people together. We sort it out. Again, there's friction there. We're sorting things out. There's something going on. We're going to figure it out. And then when we walk away, ideally that thing doesn't happen again. And if something similar happens, we have the start of a file system where we're like, oh yeah, remember this happened before? Okay, let's figure it out again. What was going on then? What's going on now? And so you can sort of rinse and repeat, so to speak. Okay, so that's one common scenario. Second common scenario is, this is actually one of my favorites. Because I've worked with a lot of people on this where they say these two people just aren't getting along. It's like a personality. Their personalities don't mix. And this person is more this way and this person's more like this. And it's usually someone's more type A and someone's a little more like laissez-faire or a little more type B. And I'm being very, very broad brushstrokes, intentionally so. So we've got, it seems like personality clash. But in a lot of cases, what's actually happening is that it's a systems issue. So employees are clashing. They seem like they're not getting all along, and they're like, but they have to work together because they're involved in like either overlapping or interconnected processes or systems, or you have a big enough practice that you have multiple people in, you have 2 roles that do very similar things, like just as, customer support for like a big company. If you need more than one person doing customer support. And so you have multiple people working customer support, and it's the same thing. It's one role, like they're doing the same thing, but you need a couple bodies. Ooh, that sounded gross, but you know what I mean? You need multiple people in those roles. So a poor leadership type response would just be, it's a personality issue. They just don't get along. It's just a personality clash. I will not disagree that some people are less likely to get along than others. You know this. I love people, and there are some people that I just don't vibe with. I don't click with in the same way as I do others. That does not explain conflict necessarily. Sometimes, but very rarely, I would say, does that explain conflict. Good leadership would figure out what is going on. So when I'm talking to person A or person B, and I might either get them together, or in some cases I might say, you know what, I just want to talk to you individually. I want to get a feel for what's going on. Or if I'm consulting with leadership at a practice, I might say, tell me what typically happens. What usually happens is that the problem is that they don't have clear understanding of where one person ends and the other begins with regard to their role. And so it looks like, or it feels like, we just don't get along, but really you don't have clearly defined systems and processes. That's very different than people not getting along. And the reality is that if your hiring is on point, most of your team will be getting along. Most of your team is going to like each other. But if you don't have clear systems, you're setting them up to fail. You're setting them up to have conflict because there's not clarity in a process or a system. So your role, again, good leadership would be figuring out what the real issue is, figuring out what's the real problem, and then fixing that, and then connecting with them together at this point And that's when I would also talk out loud about, look, I know there's been some, distress between the two of you, a little bit of upset between the two of you about, we might say that you might have thought it's about each other's personality, but what I really think is going on is that I did not, and I will take ownership, I did not have clearly defined roles. So your frustration, Jane, about Joe's lack of doing XYZ, it's not about Joe. Joe was doing what was expected of him, but I did not clarify with him that I actually need this instead of that. And that impacted you directly. This is on me. That is my responsibility. It's my responsibility to set the roles and set clear expectations and et cetera. So it's not always a personality clash. I would say, again, rarely it's a personality clash in terms of, well, I guess it depends on the size, but in the size of your practice is what I meant. If you have like 300 people, you're going to have personality clashes. But for even like small to mid-sized group practices, usually not personality, it's usually a systems issue. Number three scenario. A staff member or an employee or someone on the team who's always stirring the pot. This one's a little bit trickier, I think, because they don't usually do it in front of you. So a lot of what you might be getting as leadership is hearsay. You might be just hearing little grumblings or rumblings or some like tremors of, now I'm thinking of Kevin Bacon and Tremors. What a great old movie. Such a cheesy old movie. So some tremors or some trembling or some sort of, noise about, and one person's name keeps popping up. And it's like, I think something is happening with this part. Like there's something that's happening, that there's a lot of little moments, not havoc necessarily. This person isn't wreaking havoc, but there's some grumbling, there's something happening. Poor leadership would just avoid it altogether. Just let it slide. Like, yeah, no, it'll take care of itself. No, it won't. This person is not going to automatically or just stop doing the things that they've been doing. It will not take care of itself. Good leadership, what you should do, or what I would encourage you to do, good leadership response is to talk about it directly. So, and again, thinking about what are your core values? What can you lean on to say, look, authenticity and candor, I need to talk about this with you. And you might say to this person also, like, I want to hear from you directly. What you say is going to vary based on what's happening and what you've heard and, all of that. I'm always a little uncomfortable about voicing if I'm directly having a conversation with somebody about like they're stirring the pot. What makes me uncomfortable is directly using another person's story to me, because I don't want that person to necessarily feel thrown under the bus. I don't think that's fair. What I can do is say, I've heard you might not be very happy about some things that are going on at the practice. And so what I really want to do is I want to do a couple things with you. This is me talking to this person. This is what I might say. One, I want to understand what you might be unhappy about. And I want to just talk through it and get a sense for if there's anything to do. I want to get a sense for what might make you feel better in the role that you're in, or what responsibilities or changes you might want to see that are within the realm of possible and realistic. And I want to figure out how we stop this from happening, because it's not in accordance with our values. This is not living out values if we're hearing from other people rather than hearing directly from you. And I don't like the notion of there being a little bit of, distress or upset being spread to other people. I don't like the feel of that at the practice. I don't think that's really fair for others. It puts other people in compromising situations. It can make other folks feel uncomfortable. But more importantly, what I value is hearing from you directly, because it matters to me how you feel while you're here. Maybe in general it matters, but also, specifically while you're here. And then talk with them about it. Tell me what's actually going on. Level with me. I get the sense that you're not happy. Let's explore. Like, tell me what's going on. Who knows what it could be? It could be that they feel resentful. It could be that they want to be paid more. It could be they did a bunch of work and they didn't feel like they were celebrated for it. It could be any number of things. It could be that they don't want to be there anymore and they just haven't accepted that. That's happened before, where someone is just sort of upset and like pissy and a little bit like like they're doing all these little things. And so you're talking with them and it's like, you just got to level. Like, what? Do you want to be here? I've asked people that. Like, it doesn't seem like you want to be here. Do you want to be here? Do you want this role based on what's expected? Are you a part of this? Like, do you want to still be a part of this? I've had people say, no, I don't want to anymore. Boom, there it is. Like, that could be it. That could just be the conversation. It's like, okay, let's figure out what to do then. Let's figure out how to transition you out. Or it could be, again, something else entirely. So there's a staff member who's always stirring the pot. We want to make sure that we are addressing things with them directly, which would be good leadership, and not just letting it slide, which would be a poor leadership practice. So a couple more things, and I'm going to wrap this up. Here's a couple things to help you get through. So thinking about these as like practical strategies, excuse me. Talking is so hard sometimes. Number one, whatever hypothesis or assumption or character trait or thing you think is happening, don't assume that you are correct. You might have a hypothesis. You know, the goal in research is not to prove your hypothesis, it's to seek to disprove it. That's what we should try to do. You might say, I'm thinking that this is probably going on. I will not assume that's correct. I'm going to seek to disprove myself because I want to know what's actually going on. So the maybe shorter way of saying this is that you should be, I'm always saying should. I would encourage you. I think that it would behoove you. I think it would be beneficial for you to lead with curiosity and not assumptions. Check every assumption you make. Question it. Just ask out loud. I wonder if this is it. Like, this is what seems like is happening, but I don't actually know. I want to hear from you directly. Check any assumption you have. Lead with curiosity. That's number one. There's 4 things here. Number 2, and again, these are practical strategies. Leading with curiosity, not assumption. And again, even if you have hypotheses, seek to disprove them. Do not seek to prove them. Number 2, model healthy conflict resolution. Healthy conflict means engaging in conflict without horsemen. And the 4 horsemen are criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. And so I'm not going to get into depth with all of those, even though I really, really want to. I'm not going to. But what I'm trying to say is avoid horsemen at all costs. Engage in self-regulatory practices. Try to stay grounded. If you need a minute, take a few and say, you know what? Let me just take a few minutes to breathe. I need to bring myself back down. And then I want to re-engage. And then do that and come back. All of that healthy conflict stuff you're doing is also modeling for your team. And so they understand, okay, this is how we do it. So when you model healthy conflict, your team will follow suit. Number 3, use structured feedback. So what I mean by this is, if we're engaging in constant feedback practices, then we usually don't have stuff that's going to come up. It's already known. If you don't have structured feedback, I would look into the EOS world. We do a variety of things with feedback, including, of course, we have weekly meetings that are structured and agendaed and all that. But we also do quarterly conversations and, of course, biannual reviews. But you want some sort of structured feedback for people to be able to regularly check in and provide feedback about how they're doing, what's going on, what concerns they might have. And feedback is not, tell me how you are. Feedback might be something more specific like, hey, the quarterly conversations from EOS, for example, the 2 prompts are what's working and what's not working. That's it. Those are the 2 questions. Each party answers those questions. And it's a 2-party conversation. So when you are engaging in feedback, don't ask about what's going well. You can, sure, ask about that. But also you need to ask about what is not working for the person, what is not going well. What frustrations have you run up against in the past month or quarter or week? What concerns do you have? How are you feeling about your role still? Last time we talked, you were real enthused. What's your level of enthusiasm at this point? What have you noticed that you think could be fixed? What sort of holes are you noticing as you're going through your processes in your roles? All questions that are engaged at being proactive about seeking out the issues, finding the issues before they, come to the surface in a more negative way. Oh, last thing, and this is it. Oh my goodness gracious, a lot of talking. Last practical strategy is going to be knowing when to step in versus when to empower. You don't have to be involved in every single conflict. You don't have to diffuse every single thing. The point at which leadership steps in, from my perspective, is a point at which the first round, the first line of defense, which would be addressing it directly amongst the two, hasn't happened, or where it's escalated and it's something that's like spilled out over the entire team, like a passive aggressive email chain, or like somebody being real snarky at a meeting out loud, or like I'm hearing upset about something from like a variety of people, the same upset from a variety of people. At that point, I'm going to step in. But if there's a concern that my biller has with something my client care coordinator is doing, and my biller comes to me and says, "Man, Tara, I'm really upset about this thing," I might say, "You know what? Why don't you talk directly to client care? Just have a conversation. I want you two to try to hash it out first. If it doesn't go well, come back, follow up with me, and we can try to figure out what's going wrong." I might talk with my biller initially also to to figure out, is this a systems issue? Is this is something like personal coming up for her, like something that she needs to work through? Is this are her feelings hurt about something? Does she feel ignored in her role? I'm going to help her figure out what's going on. And then I'm going to advise her. I'm going to coach her. I'm going to help support her to talk directly to my client care. I want them to work it out. In doing so, if we go back to, remember, what are the sort of those assumptions? Whenever we're, the mindset, we want conflict to be resolved because between people, I want this to happen between the two of them specifically, because I know if they can do it, that enhances their personal relationship, but also their working relationship. It only serves to enhance what they're doing together, and they're in this together. So I could theoretically get involved, or I could empower people. That would be always the first thing I'm going to do, is I'm going to say, I really want you to go directly to that person. I'm going to help them figure out how to do that effectively, but then I'm going to let them do it. And so they get to have accountability and ownership and pride in doing this thing. And again, if it goes well, which in a lot of cases it does, then they have a better working relationship, and it's theirs to own. It's not because I stepped in and I made them, I made it better. I want them to also have like pride and ownership and being able to work through things. So we want to also empower our team to solve things directly when it's appropriate and when they can. And we can do this with supporting them. There's a lot of stuff here. I hope that it made sense. My thought is that who knows? I hope it made sense. I love conflict. I probably could talk all day about it. I mean, for hours and hours. It's so fascinating. And specific issues that people have, like specific conflict moments. Oh, so great. We did not even get into, maybe a little bit with like the emotional regulation stuff, but we really didn't get into your internal, your internal felt experience of conflict, how it lives in your body, how your history with conflict, it absolutely informs how you engage with it at your practice. And so there's a whole component here that's specific to just you, the listener right now, specific to just me, how conflict lives within me, how I engage with it. That's a whole different conversation though. Again, conflict is so incredible. So let's wrap this up. We know, again, leadership is it's not about preventing conflict. It's not about avoiding it. It's about accepting it as inevitable and helping ensure that it's done well. I have faith that you can do this. If you really want a healthy practice, there's a lot of things, right? But one of the things to do if you want a healthy practice is to engage in healthy conflict resolution. And if you notice smoke, get to it before it turns into giant flames and burns everything down. I mean, just engage in healthy conflict, model it for your team, and they'll do the same. If you are seeking more support, find me at the Culture Focus Practice membership. Go to taravossenkemper.com, click on Work with Me, and then Culture Focused Practice membership. It's a steal of a price. It's a subscription thing. You join us, every month you get a live Q&A, a live training, almost always with me, but I'll also have guest experts on, and a private group and a portal with a bunch of resources, not only resources like documents, sheets, things like that, but also resources like previous training. So even if you join, you'll have access to a lot of resources there. Oh, goodness. You stayed with me. Subscribe also. That's my second ask. Subscribe. Stay up on what's happening. If you have specific things you want to talk about, specific questions about conflict, leadership, culture, EOS, any of those things, organizational health, team engagement, employee morale, those are all the things that I love. And that is the full intention of this podcast. So drop me a line. Go to my contact form. Again, TaraVossenkemper.com. Drop me a line. Let me know what you think. Or just keep listening. It's great seeing you. Thank you for being here with me. And I'll see you next time. Bye.